Hi, I'm Brittany with Tidemark TV here today, and I've got Wes Parks here with me. He's a psychotherapist and social scientist based out of Fort Worth. A specialty of his practice is sexuality and gender, and he has testified as an expert witness on these matters in various court proceedings. As a mental health researcher and practitioner, he has published on abuse and bullying. As a social scientist, he has researched and published on public policy formation and analysis, decision-making models, public administration theory, and community development strategic planning. He's a cisgender gay male, and his pronouns are he, him, and his. So, hi, Wes. It's so great to have you here today with us.
Thanks, Brittany. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I love what you're doing with your channel so far. This is fantastic work. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. And so today, I brought you on the channel here today just to talk about what the coming out process is like for folks and to help people feel a little bit more comfortable with the whole entire process. So one of the first questions that tend to come up for folks is when they're first coming out, what are some of the common fears that folks are going to face?
Generally, the biggest fear that people face is going to be some kind of rejection, whether it's rejection by their family members or by friends or possibly by their employers. I've even seen people who are concerned about what the neighbors think when you're living in more affluent areas or when you're living in more rural areas. A lot of concerns tend to be focused on how is this going to affect my marriage, or how is this going to affect my children, or will I be able to have children in the future? Will somebody love me in the future? So it seems to be mostly centered on fears of rejection, and that's rooted in a lot of reality.
Mm-hmm. And so do you have any statistics regarding like what the likelihood is to be rejected when somebody is coming out?
Sure. We have a lot of different statistics that come from like the Pew Research Center and the Human Rights Campaign and lots of other organizations that are collecting this kind of data and aggregating it for us. And what we know is it's roughly the same whether you come out as a child or teenager as when you come out as an adult. 40% report a fairly immediate rejection by family members and close friends.
Wow. That's a startling statistic.
And it's a higher percentage if you're in rural areas than if you're in more urbanized areas.
Is there a reason behind that you're aware of?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts about it because I grew up in rural Arkansas, so I definitely understand the challenges of somebody being queer in rural America. And I did not come out in the rural community because it just did not feel safe. There was no way that was going to be safe in a more agricultural based rural community that you either made your money from farming or you made your money from factory work. So it's a little harder in rural areas because they also tend to be more religiously oriented. And this is kind of important to remember that this LGBTQ issue, this is the last bastion of socially acceptable discrimination. People go to services 1, 2, 3 times a week, sometimes more, where they hear from this authoritarian figure that it is okay to discriminate against these people. It is okay to dislike or hate this group of people. It is okay to treat this group of people differently. And well, for the Bible tells me so, though that's not exactly what the Bible says. And in rural America, you have a lot more engagement in the religious ideology than you do in the urbanized centers.
Mm-hmm. So for folks, if there is a religious piece to it and folks are struggling with coming out or their sexuality and they happen to be religious, you said the Bible doesn't exactly say that you should discriminate and that homosexuality isn't okay or bisexuality isn't okay. So what exactly does it say?
I am not a theologian, so I can't speak to matters of biblical context. I did grow up in a fundamentalist Church of Christ in rural America, so I kind of remember all of the verses that are pounded into your head, Romans and Leviticus and abomination, a man sleeping with a man and his abomination against God. I remember all of the verses. And I can't speak to the historical context. That may have made a lot of sense at that time. At that time, slavery made a lot of sense. At that time, men having 20 wives and 500 concubines made a lot of sense. It doesn't make a lot of sense in modern time But it's still a big issue for people, because when you're a vulnerable and marginalized group, and we're talking about a very small group of the population, less than 5% based on most recent meta-analytic data, it's really easy to discriminate against this group because they have no power. They have no mobilization. Yes, we have pride parades and we have lobbying organizations, but it's 5% against 95%. And 98% of this country identifies as Christian in some form or fashion. So the numbers don't really line up well for people who identify anywhere under the queer spectrum. And 30% of LGBTQ adults report feeling unwelcome in churches, and that's because they have been told they are not welcome, they have been told not to come back, or they sit through a sermon where they are railed against from the pulpit. 3 out of 10. I don't think many people would continue to go back to churches if that was their experience.
Sure, absolutely. And so I do have a question to go back to the rejection piece. If somebody is worried about being rejected by their friends or their family members, what kind of options do they have available to them?
Probably more options than they realize, because in the initial stages, everything is very scary, because you're coming into this understanding of yourself and accepting something about yourself that maybe you've been pushing away, you haven't wanted to deal with. But there are a lot of support groups out there. There are a lot of actual churches that are open and including and actually affirming. And there's a difference between accepting and affirming. There are a lot of very affirming churches. There are a lot of very affirming community organizations. There are many very affirming employers. So it is not the same as it was in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, when we would hear tales about what our grandparents and our parents saw when one of the queers came out and had to be completely rejected by society. It's not quite that bad anymore. Better in urban areas than rural areas still, but there are a lot of options. We have a lot of support groups. There's a lot of online presence. Social media has become this godsend for things other than porn and hate mongering. It's great for support groups. We have a lot of online support options too.
And so, one of the things that I'm reminded is that a lot of times I tell my clients that I work with of, hey, sometimes your family of origin, or hey, sometimes your base group of friends may not be accepting of you when you're coming out, but it doesn't mean that you're not going to find your tribe later on in life, or people that will accept you. And you are so much happier and you have more authentic relationships with people when you can really be able to be yourself.
Yeah, it's a big thing we talk about, is this notion of an inherited family versus a chosen family, or versus your tribe. And sometimes I think it helps to really just run the numbers. I'm a big numbers person. I talk with my clients about, okay, how many days out of the year do you spend with your inherited family? And if you had to rank this in significance or importance, how important are those days of the year? How many days of the year do you spend with your chosen family, and how important is that? And when they start to realize that they spend a lot more time with their chosen family than their inherited family, makes it a little easier to see the positive side of coming out and living their genuine lives and having an authentic, wonderfully rich experience. But that's not what we're taught. We're socialized from a very early age that family is the thing. This family unit is the sacred thing that has to be protected at all costs. And sometimes the cost of that is good mental health and good social functioning. But if you really look at your priorities, most people don't prioritize their family of origin that way. And it makes it a lot easier to navigate the coming out process when you can keep that perspective.
Yeah, and I've had so many clients sitting on my couch going, hey, I actually owe this to my family, or I must do this because blood is thicker than water type of thing. And so it's almost as if you're giving permission to be able to say, hey, it's okay to say no to your family that you've inherited, or your family of origin.
And I think sometimes it's helpful to remind people, we get caught up in cliches a little bit too much. And I love that one. Blood is thicker than water. And that's when you have to look at the historical context. The phrase is actually, the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb, which is actually the opposite of how we're using it. So when you think about it in those terms, what the phrase actually means, the covenant is your chosen family, that's your tribe, versus your inherited family. And when you can shift that perspective to the people who enrich your lives, the people who support you, who bring joy, or to quote Marie Kondo, the things in your life you want to keep that spark joy, I think that shift in perspective is critical for navigating the coming out process and actually just living a healthy, authentic life.
Hmm. Yeah, and so I was wondering, to go back, you had mentioned a little bit about like the difficulties that folks face if they're trying to look for a church when they identify as homosexual or LGBT, whatever the case may be. And so what are some of the other struggles that folks usually face when they're starting to come out?
Big one is fear of losing their job and their livelihood. And that's a really valid fear because you invest a lot of time getting to that point in your life or preparing for a career. We go through elementary school, junior high, high school, most of us college, a lot of us grad school, and even more grad school after that. And you establish this career trajectory only to learn that, wow, this isn't a protected status. They can absolutely fire you for this for any reason that they choose to. They can get away with it, and it is devastating. Talk about losing your livelihood, maybe losing your home, your children, your family. It's a very terrifying prospect, especially in this day and age where most Americans are now $400 or less away from homelessness, and 1 in 200 people that we know, so think about 200 friends you have on Facebook, just check off 200. One of those 200 is likely to be homeless at some point in their life. So we're a very financially unstable country right now, and you talk about losing your livelihood, it's terrifying. And even employers that profess to have workplace protections don't always honor that, and it's not always implemented well from the top down. So sure, the CEO and the CFO may agree with that, but local managers in Arkansas or Georgia or Mississippi or Alabama don't enforce proactive policies, and that can be really problematic. So outside of family, employment becomes the next biggest area that people are concerned about. The third, which I'm not sure why it's the third and not the second, but the third is dating and love. Can I be loved? Can I find a mate? Will somebody ever want to settle down with me? So if you look at those top three, losing your family, maybe being without a job and nobody's going to love you, those are kind of the three biggest parts of a lived experience.
Mm-hmm. And, when you were talking about the jobs, and sure, the CFO or the CEO might approve of something, but maybe the managers don't enforce policies. I've seen that a lot because I still live in a really pretty like rural community, and in a lot of the manufacturing and the factory work that goes on here, it's not that the managers aren't supported, it's that there's just so much hatred and stigma associated with all the workers that it creates a very sort of toxic work environment where you feel very isolated, and they're just not enforcing that with the workers themselves.
Yeah, and you have to think about group dynamics to a certain point, for better or for worse. When you're looking at employment situations, we don't live in a vacuum, we're social creatures. And yes, my manager can say that everybody has to stop using slurs. They can no longer say these patently offensive things because as an adult, 60% of people who identified as LGBTQ faced some form of slurs on a near daily basis, either a joke, a microaggression type joke, or an actual outright slur. 60%, that's a very high number. So yes, your manager can say, sure, you can't say those things to John or Sue in the workplace. Doesn't mean that your coworkers are going to like you. It doesn't mean you're going to feel welcome. It doesn't mean you're going to feel safe. And that's a really big difference in an accepting environment and an affirming environment. An accepting environment says, yeah, sure, we'll let you be here. That's fine. Do your job. An affirming environment says, we value you for exactly who you are, and we will do all we can to support you and enrich your experience here. I think it's important to look for affirming employers versus just accepting ones.
And how does like one go about looking for that? Because I don't know that it's really like well advertised on like job listings that you see on Indeed or, things like that.
It's really complicated. So with my clients, one of the first places I send them to is the HRC's Corporate Equality Index, Human Rights Campaign Corporate Equality Index. And HRC compiles this list every year of hundreds and sometimes thousands of employers, and they give them the score based on LGBTQ inclusive metrics. Like, do you have affirming healthcare? Do you have trans affirming healthcare?
Mhm.
Do you actively promote LGBTQ visibility in the community? Like, do you sponsor pride parades, or do you donate to resource centers, things of that nature? And there are 600 companies in 2018's list that have a perfect 100. That's fantastic. And some of them are very big national companies like Lockheed Martin and Bell Helicopter and Microsoft, all the way down to smaller companies people don't really think that much about.
Mhm.
And so I advise my clients, that's the first place to start. Look at this list and see who on this list has a local presence that then matches up with your goals.
Mhm.
But you have to go a little bit deeper than numbers, because believe it or not, Walmart at one point was on the list until they got sued in 2 different lawsuits for EEOC violations for gender related issues. So companies can fall off the list.
Mhm.
And when a list only comes out once a year, it can be kind of hard to track that. So most of us are looking at like Indeed and Glassdoor and LinkedIn. And I think it's important to use all of those data points to get as much of a well-rounded picture as you can, and then decide if this is the right company to apply for.
Mhm. Wonderful. And you had mentioned this third fear of, hey, am I going to be able to find somebody who's going to love and like love me, and I can love them, and we can be soulmates together. And so I'm wondering, what would the dating process look like after somebody's come out? Like, how do you know if somebody else is already out or not?
I will say that a lot of that is based on geography. I have a lot of clients who have moved here from New York, LA, San Francisco, Chicago, London, Madrid, and they all say the same thing. Dating in the DFW Metroplex is harder than anywhere else in the world. Part of that is just because we have a very specific type of gay culture here. I have nicknamed it Dallitude. That's kind of what it is, where it's a very image obsessed culture of everybody is a 7, they think they're a 10, and they're all looking for 14s, and it's this very image obsessed group, which is not representative of America as a whole. It doesn't necessarily represent the ideals of every gay man, woman, bisexual, transgender, gender diverse individual who wants to enter the dating pool. So I think you have to look at geography, and you have to kind of temper your view based on what's happening here. I had actually run a calculation. There's a woman who does a TED Talk on the odds of her finding a mate. She's a cisgender heterosexual woman, and the odds of her finding a mate, I think it was in Philadelphia. She's a scientist, and she had calculated that her odds were about 1 in 1,000 in a city the size of Philadelphia with 1.5 million people.
Wow.
So I used the exact same metric that she did, and I ran the exact same statistical calculation for the Metroplex, and my odds of finding an actual mate were 1 in 5,200.
Wow, that's staggering.
That's staggering. And a lot of what happens when people first come out is they start going to bars, which can be fun, especially more so with friends, and they download all of the dating apps. But not all dating apps are dating apps. You get like Match and OkCupid. Those are more dating, but more and more people are downloading apps like Scruff and Growler and Grindr and Zeus. And they are ways to connect with the community, but they tend to be a little bit more hookup oriented. And for people just coming out, that can be great. Sexual liberation is a great thing. Healthy sex is a fantastic thing. But if you're looking for more, you kind of have to wonder about all the people on the apps. I went out with some friends about 2 weeks ago, and we went out to the Roundup, which is a gay bar in Dallas, more of a kind of country western bar, which kind of always cracks me up to see these big burly gay men line dancing and holding each other. It's kind of cute. It's definitely heartwarming. But we couldn't help notice that everybody is looking down on their phone, and they all have Grindr up. I'm like, why do you need to have Grindr up? You're in a gay bar. Turn to your right, turn to your left. There's the nearest gay guy. You don't need an app when you're enmeshed in the community. But it's not about that. It's about looking for the best possible option among the 800 people that are in the bar that night, and trying to narrow it down. And that's a tough thing to navigate, primarily because we were not taught how to do that. Most of us grew up with heterosexual parents in heteronormative environments where we learned about heteronormative dating. We did not learn about gay and lesbian dating. We did not learn about trans and gender diverse dating. We didn't learn about LGBTQ sex practices other than use a condom. We didn't learn about what romance and love can look like in this group that we're told shouldn't be happening. So it's an interesting way to navigate the dating pool when you have very little to no frame of reference from your upbringing and the people around you. You know, we're 4 to 5% of the population, so 95% of what we see are heteronormative dating and sex and romance experiences.
And even if you look in mainstream like societal culture, and like and you look at all the romantic comedies, if they're heterosexual as well, even those have like a negative sort of connotation to it, because it sets up unrealistic expectations, and there's always like a knight in shining armor, and so it's kind of like you're hit with a double whammy of like, hey, these are unrealistic expectations for dating.
Right. And that's really problematic when you don't know what to actually expect, and then trying to figure out what you want in this subset of a population when there's not really that much support. And yeah, I mean, we all go home and watch Hallmark movies during the holidays. I'm a sucker for Hallmark holiday movies at Christmas time, but that's not what heteronormative life is like. So why on earth would we try to apply that same standard to gay, lesbian, and trans dating? It's problematic.
And so could you speak a little bit about to what expectations you should have for being in a healthy gay or lesbian or transgender relationship?
I think the biggest thing that people have to do is focus on living their best, most genuine, most authentic lived experience. You have to be true to yourself with whatever that means. So if you are somebody who can only be in a monogamous relationship, then only engage with other people who have that same goal. If you are somebody who wants to be polyamorous or consensually non-monogamous, then you have to focus on that side of things, and you have to communicate. I think we have to be realistic about the dating pool and realistic about our prospects when we know, okay, this is who I am. I think it helps to make a list. These are the things I value in a relationship. Let's make a bullet list. These are the things I bring to a relationship. These are the things I want from a relationship. And when we look at these lists, it really helps you hone down what you're looking for, what it is that you want to bring into your life, who you want to let in. And I think you have to start with that just most basic level of who am I and what am I looking for to bring into my life where I can also contribute equally. Once you have that down, you have to look realistically at the dating pool. You have to look at what social media has done to our dating pool. You have to look at what social media has done to our psychology. Think about how many of us are on Facebook every day, or Instagram, or Twitter, or Snapchat, or whatever. And social media is this wonderfully, carefully curated medium of me presenting the best version of myself that I want you to see so that you will envy my life or you will admire me. There's not a picture of me on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram brushing my teeth with my hair out to here first thing in the morning, knocking coffee over in the bathroom. Nobody's going to post that picture. I'm sure not going to post that picture. Instead, we become this selfie-obsessed society where we take the picture and then we spend 10 minutes editing it for this perfect presentation. And that's what you see on the dating sites. It's what you see on the dating apps. It's not real. So you have to know that's not real. And it's okay that you don't look like that. It's okay that you don't tick off every single qualification that somebody's listed out of 100 items. That's okay.
Yeah.
Where is the overlap? What are you looking for? What can you bring into your life that helps you with your most genuine, authentic lived experience? Being realistic and loving yourself and focusing on what it is that is the right thing for you versus the right thing for the people watching you.
Mm-hmm. That is such good advice to have. I think one thing that I might add to that is when you were saying let's generate your like want list that you have, you also need to I would say that you would also need to pare it down into what your non-negotiables are, because like you said, not everybody is gonna check off every single thing on that list, and you have to identify what your non-negotiables are, because otherwise you're just gonna get lost in a sea of like data, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, it's pretty important to know what your boundaries are, but I think that goes even further than just our non-negotiable. That's a great place to start. But like all relationships, LGBTQ relationships have struggles when a relationship has commenced, and you have to remember where your boundaries are and not lose yourself in the relationship. love is this wonderfully, sometimes intoxicating feeling at times. The serotonin and dopamine burst can be amazing. And then the next morning comes in and nobody did the dishes, and I just tripped over the cat, and nobody picked up the dry cleaning. And now we want to go on this $20,000 luxury cruise that we can't really afford because we got the two Mercedes payments. And you have to know where those boundaries are. And it starts, I think you're absolutely right, with what are my non-negotiables? What are my no-goes? What are absolutely non-starters for me? And remembering that as you go. Now, I think there's got to be some flexibility because situations change over time. For example, years ago, my non-starter was, I don't want kids. I don't ever want kids. If kids are your thing, but what you want at 20 and what you want at 40, not the same. And now I'm, constantly looking at surrogates and adoption sites. So things could change, but you have to have a starting point. I think you're absolutely right. That starting point has to include your non-starters.
Mm-hmm. And so I'm just being mindful of our time here. The last question that I had for you is, if we've got folks who might be listening to this who are friends or family of somebody they suspect might be LGBTQ, but they haven't came out yet. So what are some things that those people can do to be supportive of somebody that they might suspect?
Well, I think we start by changing the terminology. I did not coin this phrase, and I cannot remember where I read it, but I think it's wonderful. Let's quit calling it coming out. Let's start referring to it as us letting others in. Mm-hmm. What you're wanting is for other people that you suspect to be gay or lesbian to let you in to their life in that regard. And people come out on their own terms, and we can't force people out of a closet. We can't drag them out of a closet kicking and screaming. Sometimes I wish I could. God knows I wanted to with my own friends and family members. I think the best thing you can do is just let people know that it is a safe space to let you in. And sometimes that's with very subtle things like, hey, do you want to see this movie? It's kind of cool. It's got, it seems to be kind of queer themed. What do you think about going to see that? All the way up through, hey, I'm on this letter writing campaign against SB 17 and HB 1035. Can I give you this information and let you know where I stand in case you want to write letters? So it can range from very subtle all the way up to, hey, I just want you to know I really like everybody. I even like queer people, gay people, genderqueer people, trans people, lesbians, bisexual, agender, asexual, pansexual, poly. I like it all, just in case you wondered. Sometimes even just making that little statement is going to open the door. Mm-hmm. But people will let us in when they are ready to let us in, and we have to respect that boundary. And just because somebody pressures you to let them in doesn't mean you have to. You have to do this on your own time frame because this is your lived experience, and you have to honor that.
Mm-hmm. And one of the other biggest things that I've heard is, if they do end up coming out to you, is it's coined, the term is, do not go and tell everybody else immediately, because it's not your story to tell.
It's absolutely not. You don't. We live in a society where we love to share information. That's what social media is all about. It's just a more efficient gossip system. But this is a really scary thing for a lot of people because in some areas it's just not safe. They're still trying to navigate this. They're still trying to figure it out. And usually when people come out, they come out to a couple of close friends first, then their family, then more friends, then their employer, then the community, the world at large. They test the waters a little bit, putting a toe in the water. And when you out people, you don't give them a chance to put the toe in the water. You've just thrown them in the deep end without understanding the ramifications of that. And it's disrespectful of their boundaries and their experience. It's a really jerky thing to do. It's very selfish to think that you know better for somebody what their timeline should be. That's not love. That's a form of abuse.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't have said it better. Is there anything that you feel like you need to add that we didn't discuss yet?
Oh gosh, no. You had so many wonderful questions. What a great, fun discussion.
Yes, thank you so much for being so informative. And if folks want to work with you, how can they find you?
Probably the easiest way to find me is on the web. My website is www.fortworthlgbt.com. You can read all about me there. Not really that big on social media. I do have a Facebook that I think I posted on a year ago, and I'm still trying to figure out Twitter and Instagram and all that. So there's all the links on the website for how they can contact me and read all about me if they have any questions or just want to reach out with comments or questions. I'm always happy to hear from folks to see if there's any way that I can be part of their lived experience.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Brittany.